but as you realize, this is a pretty tough job because we had, in my view, there are three very different talks. Maybe not as different as I feel them because you guys seem to get along, and I would have trouble getting along with each of you separately, but we don't know.
We can pretend that we don't get along and just to make it a bit more fun.
So let's see.
Pretend there's like a real antagonism and like opposition.
Yeah.
So let's see how we can have like a couple of common questions. No, you.
But
have some common questions that sort of emerge. I have my questions, but maybe not of immediate answer. But maybe we get to that. We have a couple of questions.
Well, okay, this is good. I think the whole idea is to get the conversation started and to involve everybody in the audience as well. So I had a couple of questions in mind that are more like, like this provocations. But let's start with something really broad that could maybe connect you in opposition, but and I love the idea that you are finding ways also to talk from these really different paradigms, particularly in the understanding of what information is for, or how it's circulating. So, Tasos, I saw one thing in common between your talk and Mel's, even though, of course, it's a really different thing. There seems to be like a real power, even hegemonic power, in like statistical objects. Statistics seems to be like the way in which a lot of realities are formed. They're based on, the capture of very large number of, operations that allow you to generalize them. For instance, let's say shipments, let's say, ambulance traffic, let's say pets, all these things, you seem to know them by the large numbers. And so the statistical power and the hegemony of statistics in the way we produce realities, like shared realities, for instance, like urban realities, let's say transportation networks. I see a very strong parallel with the fact that, for instance, Mel was telling us about the way they choose in order to, create this inspirational kind of conversation space in virtual reality. They choose very well-known figures like LeBron James or Serena Williams, which, for someone like me, they could be completely uninspiring. I would be so, I don't want to see myself as LeBron or Serena. Both. Honestly, I couldn't care less about either, but perhaps Serena is more interesting to use as an aspiration. I don't know. The point is that the marginal, the off-center, certain, inspirations you could find on,
hello.
Good morning. So, you could find inspiration in figures that are not dominating, that are not, but these technologies don't give you any access to those other figures, those other examples. Okay, that's one side of the question, with regards to the hegemonic power of statistics in the formation, in the construction of certain objects that then are applied to urban realities. This is one side of the question, is statistic power. But on the other side, and this is more like to Patricia, and I don't think it's less critical, but of course, certainly, at least on the bibliographical side, I'm closer to Patricia's readings, but I see that we have a deeper problem. We don't depend on statistics, but for any proposition, we depend on unanimity, which is very difficult. Unanimity,
like consensus or something?
yeah, unanimous impulses, you know, like one, yes, consensus, yes, you could call it consensus, but I think unanimous is more like spiritual and ethic, whereas consensus is more like, yeah, statistical or,
it's exactly the statistic.
So unanimity would be like, you know, we unanimously voted for, you know, like the abolition of whatever, you know, patriarchy. So in order to produce these huge abolitional movements or gestures that will transform reality in that way, you know, let's say for instance like to the end of, you know, like monoculture or whatever, you will need consensus on a really, really high spiritual level and in a very large number. Whereas consensus, you know, it's a figure that we know that is, well, occurs mostly on the micro-political level. And the more you know, like grow in reach, the less it is, you know, like likely to find that level of consensus. And basically, this is the history of the left, you know, like the history of the left, you know, like, and you can look at any, like, you know, like case study, the Spanish Civil War. It's that, right? It's the fragmentation of the left before it can reach a critical consensus that then can actually change. So, on the one hand, we have a problem of like excess of statistical power, on the other, you have a problem of excess of like consensus dependency. And that's how you would build like those two levels of reality, critical reality, and on the other, like hegemonic, you know, like urbanic reality. Okay, there you go. Very simple question just to get started. I'm sorry.
So what's the question? What's the question now?
Well, both systems are...
That felt more like a comment than a question.
Both systems are completely, you know, like are... in fact, they're completely incomplete. Both systems seems to be like flawed by incompleteness. On the one hand, the dependency on quantitative data. On the other one, you know, like the dependency of, you know, like on, let's say, like mimetic effects on the political level.
But maybe we should split up your question because it's an integrated.
No, I think I have a response to that.
Okay.
I would certainly raise the issue of dependency on data in that sense.
First of all, I think that when you talk about statistics and consensus, they're both, it's a probability of something happening, especially it's the same thing, I think, for me. But with all of these ideas, projects, and data, I don't think the important things are happening where there is consensus. The aha moment is the one that happens when weird things happening in all this kind of multidimensional data, at least for me, because you said
you explain?
Usually, the models, if you really go with everything working well, then you're going to get exactly the same boring answer as every time. Sometimes there's a moment where the data, the parallels between different data, at least for me, create a discontinuity from what I would internally expect. Probably that's the point where it generates enough interest in my brain to go and look deeper and look at other things and maybe create a unique idea or unique model or moment to create something new. I think that's the aha moment. If it's something that is obviously true, then there's not enough space for me to kind of invent something different. So I feel like, yeah, it's a very fair point, but I think the aha moments are the ones that are the weirdos, we call them in the lab, let's say, the weirdos, the weirdo data, the weird data, let's say, because I work with models and data. I don't know whether you have something to respond to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, where we land. Like, I'm even surprised that I'm surprised that there's a surprise that we actually have so much in common, because I have a very similar answer. I think I would just maybe push it a little bit further in the sense of like, what is the purposefulness of these technologies? Is it to optimize our modes of cohabitation today as we know them, with all of the norms and encodings that we currently exist with, or are these potentially opportunities to do that ungrounding, unhoming work, right? And we were speaking with Bartlett today, right? So like the really important example from histories of machine learning, for example, move 37 go, AlphaGo, when AlphaGo wins, right? Because before the narrative we have is just, it's these machines aren't capable of creativity, it's just, inductive reasoning all the way down, which is basically, where you just are projecting what you know from the past into a probability account, so it's like working on this kind of very predictive level, but then in unsupervised conditions, other forms of intelligence can manifest, and if we are able to not project an overly current human normative status on it, what can we possibly learn from it? Because it's like literally engaging with a very different platform of reasoning. And that also has the consequence of exploding what we think intelligence is, right? Like we go into plant intelligence, animal intelligence now. Part of this is provoked by the fact that what is AI at the core? It's an externalization of modeling what we think thinking is. And then that allows you artifactually to interact with what you think thinking is. And all of the so-called failures of AI are actually super interesting, because it's like, oh, we used to think it was just inputs, and then you teach little kids, you're like, memorize all these facts, and that's a form of intelligence, and now we know, like, that was kind of dumb, and it doesn't work. So it's like, that's what I meant about this artifactual engagement, but it needs to be seized as an opportunity to unsettle us as well, and that would destabilize our presumed human monopoly on intelligence as a kind of form of, that's.
Thank you. Great, because I said I was aiming for a provocation, and I think it kind of worked. What you seem to be connected with is actually, I think, what I was calling the incompleteness of both positions, like how much consensus is required to enact a critical transformation, and at the same time, how much moral power statistic has on the daily decision-making level. Now, Patricia, you spoke about this will be my second question, then we'll open up for everybody.
Also, just like remind Mel is actually joining us now, so we can extend
Oh,
the
excellent.
conversation, because I know.
Hi, Mel.
I just
Great.
wanted to mention
See you.
that, Mel, because you happen to be behind in the dramaturgy.
Excellent. Yeah. So the other question, actually, again, more for the sake of provocation and looking for an actual, elaborate answer, is at some point you started speaking about the need for a multi-scalar kind of perspective, instead of reducing everything to one tone, one Vitruvian man, etc. And so this idea of a multi-scalar is really interesting when we go back to this whole backdrop, theoretical backdrop that we were referring to for the symposium, which is urban planning, future cities, how we build ecosystems that are more plural, and we can imagine a better display of a better organization of forces. In any case, there's a scalar issue that is constantly in friction with what you may call the politics, but also the eco-poetics of difference. There's a constant scalar issue of some scales are used to then produce others, or to operate in others, or to dominate others. One example could be, and I think Tasos is a perfect example, being Greek working in London, because London, and not the UK, but particularly London, is a very, very dominating ecosystem in terms of scalar ruling, meaning a lot of research is carried out there, a lot of research is resolved there, and then it is built as prototype for any other ecosystem. Call it Thessaloniki, So you will have a city that is completely not, translatable, to a lot of realities that then inform decisions that become architectural, urban planning decisions, technology, in a place like Thessaloniki, just to mention one that is, again, I'm being provocative on purpose, but the issue of multi-scalar translatability or transitions or flows between scales, it is itself, I think a very, very contentious matter. And again, how can we guarantee if this is the way, or like urban planning or decisions in urban design and so on and so forth, if this is the way decisions are made, how can we even have an aspiration that is legitimate, to a multi-scalar perspective, to this kind of respect of, like multi-scalar life.
That's why I liked her presentation a lot, and I'll say something now. Once upon a time, everything happened in a local level, right? It was if you had an opposition to your local rural, let's say, it was only going to happen through maybe written media that were distributed 5 kilometers from you. I don't know, I'm just giving you like random numbers, right? Now we live in a completely different kind of world where distances are weird and minimized sometimes or maximized because some ideas from across the pond, let's say in the US, now I'm not going to go into the US ever again probably, they migrate here very, very quickly through means of, this. That's why I asked her about the information flow and the typologies and the non-Euclidean, let's say, ideas that I really liked in her presentation, right? So I think what you're questioning here is very, very valid because we live in a world, maybe Mel, the mixed reality environment now, right? Even if we like it or not, we live in an environment where now a friend of mine from Athens that I haven't seen for a couple of months sent me something there, and maybe it's also political provocation, something happens, right? So I think now we have to find ways, especially for us that you say that, oh, maybe I'm using too much statistical intelligence, which I don't think I use. I think statistical intelligence now, it's on the way out because it's very linear, it's very, the way that we used to do data learning, let's say, data analysis. It's no longer the case because even now, and I'm trying to be an expert, but because I don't know, I know a lot, but not that much. Even now the LLM models, and I think you brought something up like this now in your previous response, they don't work, they don't function as a word predictor as we first thought. We first thought they read all Wikipedia, etc., the big corpus, and they just predict the next word. And like 2 days ago, two days ago, and I haven't read it through in detail, but Claude 4 came out, and there is always a technical report that talks about how this model or whatever entity tries to deceive its creators in many, many ways that are not exactly a word predictor. Which this is the fact, the bit for me is that's why when I responded earlier to your question, the aha moment is the weird one, the one that is not expected in the data. If we all expected something in the data, she wouldn't have written a book because it would be probably something already written. So the weird, and now the models we're seeing the new patterns there, which are emerging, and it's not going to be the kind of the linear prediction. This is what I feel. I mean, I don't know. That's my take. I'm not the super expert in LLMs, but yeah.
Can you give an example of an aha experience for you and relate that to this comment on how does what you do in London possibly translate or does not translate to Thessaloniki?
Look, with the work that we do, at the Space Syntax Lab, there's like for me, for example, an aha moment for me is that, for example, a very, very simple, and it was just the last, on my last page, on the thank you page, I had a 3D view all over London. We did like a 3D urban canyon view of what you see when you're there as a human. So your human experience is this tall buildings, let's say, at the center of Thessaloniki, and I had a discussion yesterday with Joanna, that the center of Thessaloniki, for me, having spent 18 years in London, felt like, very, very thin lines of very tall buildings, 7th floor high, right? So that the compression I felt, I wanted to move towards a different location where it was like one of the monuments that I don't remember now. So okay, so I wanted, you know, and this is what I told Joanna, and she said like, oh yes, because this is the way that the same feeling. So if we take this data, a LiDAR scan of Thessaloniki, and the LiDAR scan of London, which is the 3D surface of London, and the 3D surface of Thessaloniki, and we sample it in the same way, I almost bet money that if we question people in London and in Athens, in Thessaloniki, sorry, beg your pardon, they will give us a similar response to how they felt in that space, with totally an unsupervised clustering model. So there is something to the essence of space that people react to it, and it's very, very simple. It's, I don't know, the geometry, the morphology. So that's something that we use. That's why I said that we use this kind of methods to even ground other types of data that are not typical to us. I don't know, I hope that makes sense.
So are you saying that that models developed on data analysis of London will translate to Thessaloniki, and on top of that, generate the same feeling of people in the two cities?
Not one-to-one. Okay, yeah, it's not just one. It's not just one data set and then you bring it here. No, no. But complex models do have, yes, segregated communities. They have some underlying structures that perceive all over the world, right? So favelas in now they call it communities. I think they have a different word, but or favelas in Brazil, with slums in India, internally and externally, and through their interaction with the rest of the city, they do have some similar patterns that probably, if you do a deep analysis of the log, if you had good enough data, like some of the layers that we work with, I think you would see some similar patterns. I hope so. I mean, that's what
I'm really going to push you on this one.
Oh.
So if the result is that you reveal generalities rather than specificities, then I'm not very interested.
There are specificities because space is different, culture is different. It's not exactly the same. We're not.
So how do you? But how do you reveal that? Because you're very sure that.
But is that, I don't know if my
you're
question.
You're very sure that if you analyze favelas versus what was your.
In certain things, and not everything. I won't really.
So
it's
what,
not about
I'm
the
interested in is the difference. Is can your approach, can your data analysis, can it reveal differences rather than universalia?
But yeah, but difference on what? Let's say difference on which topic? Maybe not. Maybe the answer is no. So I'm not sure.
Uniqueness rather than generality.
There is uniqueness in the way that the space, even the way that probably, and I'm not entirely sure because I haven't done an analysis of. So okay, now I've never done an analysis of an Indian slum, for example. So I'm not sure how. I think that they will have, due to the weather, due to the location, due to the geography of the place, right? Topogeography. I think they will have unique spatial characteristics for sure. But they will have also underlying social and spatial constructs that are similar. I'm not sure. Maybe they're not. I haven't done the two analysis, so I'm not.
So, no, of course, underlying my question is of course the whole issue or dependency on big data and what it gets us. And if it gets us like the conclusion that things are much more similar than we thought they were, then it's not very interesting. Because then we'd rather go, and now back to your question, we'd rather go to qualitative methods than to quantitative methods. And that's why I stop here.
I agree with you on that one. Oh, sorry.
Well, it's also a question of what it's used for, right? Because it's kind of nebulous big data. I mean, that's the thing, is it's used in the stupidest way now. It's used to sell us ads and things. So it's driving us to a uniform behavior. So that it's not like that we're here and the data's there.
You think you're going to have a choice on how to use it?
No, I mean, that's the politics, and I mean, frankly, that's like it's a huge problem, because the one thing that's the elephant in the room is the political economy around this technology, which is like, Europe has no place in it, honestly, in a series. It's like California, it's not even US, it's California and China, and you have to engage with these core infrastructures, and that's like a really a material, energetic reality of a lot of the computational procedures that we're really talking about in the abstract. So it's an issue that we can't ignore.
What's really interesting is that just to take a very, very specific occurrence here, in Mel's presentation, there was, Mel is still here, there was like an appearance of Alan Turing, and in your presentation, there was a quote of Turing, and they were like completely, like coming from like completely different versions of reality, and particularly the work and the public perception of Turing. And I think that's really interesting. And it's not statistical, like difference in that sense cannot be just like, charted out. Okay, this is like whatever level 1 and level 8, like so like deep reading, on Turing's work or legacy.
Yeah, but I mean, this is also because you brought up this. Sorry, I'm a bit losing my brain, a bit tired. It's almost end of term, so I'm a bit overwhelmed. But this question of deception came up, and I couldn't help but thinking that, like, one of the core, I think, again, and this is something that my colleague A.A. Capilla, who I was citing, talks about in terms of a Turing orthodoxy. It's not anti-Turing, but it was like a pervasive way that Turing still, a certain orthodoxy, and that is this deception, right? Because especially if you have, let's say, feminist proclivities are involved in computation, of course, it's based on the imitation game, as we all know from the film, right? So it's like, can you pass, and then we, of course, know the personal history of Turing, gets lauded as a champion encryptor, brilliant, like, for all intents and purposes, a genius, but of course, chemically castrated for being a homosexual, right? So, like, all of that normative history is erased and now celebrated, but the point being is, like, what is that narration around the history of computation that is premised on the deception to it's gonna think that it's another human talking to you as a kind of marker of intelligence, or what were you saying? It was gonna, like, the chat GPT is trying to trick you or something, right? Like, so there's this kind of a really curious, almost, I mean, I would love to hear from a psychoanalytic perspective of this, like, quasi, like, the mistrust, the skepticism, when does it bend on paranoia, but nonetheless it's baked into the actual narrative history of computation, is like, it's premised on the capacity to deceive. And that's contested now, but at least that was the Turing test back in the day, right?
Completely,
Yeah.
and you could ask, if you are in that virtual reality and you are in front of Turing, who is like sharing your like roundtable, like here, you could say like, oh, are you here as, Turing, the great pioneer of computation, or are you here as Turing, one of the martyrs of, like queer techno dissidents? Mm-hmm. Like, how are you here? And like we could ask Mel, like, what was the presentation of Turing about? Was there any element of queer, like, I don't know, like, interest in that appearance? Is that dimension present, or is it foreclosed?
So in the panel we did, we brought in Turing not Turing, we brought in under the assumption that ChatGPT has read everything that there is in writing about Turing, and therefore can represent in its own way questions that it might be asked. That's the only reason we wanted to do that, to see what happened. It was really an experiment in front of an audience. And since there were no issues raised about, let's say, the political and sexual side and so on, that's all the ChatGPT concentrated on. So if it had been a different kind of discussion, and the discussion was about where is AI and extended reality taking us, then presumably the ChatGPT would have said other things. But since it was very focused on a particular, almost not technical, but let's say important societal question, that's how it responded. And we just raise something else? Can I raise another issue?
Of course.
Somebody mentioned something earlier which made me think about the metaverse. And I'm just wondering what the panel thinks, especially space syntax. So imagine in the not too distant future, if the world survives, that we're walking around every day with pretty lightweight glasses, which display mixed reality or augmented reality, it doesn't matter. You see the real world and you see virtual objects overlaid. And every person can choose whatever they want. So they're walking through London, let's say Oxford Street, but some people are seeing one kind of Oxford Street and other people are seeing another. Some people are seeing it crowded, some people are seeing it empty. I don't know, some people are seeing it with new buildings in that don't really exist and so on. So how is that going to change all of this kind of analysis of urban living and the space syntax? Is it going to make any sense if everybody's seeing their own different world? Because space syntax is based on, as I remember, I used to talk a lot with Alan Penn. Space syntax is based on how people navigate through architectural spaces and how the format of the spaces influences their behaviour. But if everyone is seeing a different space, what's going to happen? Both from a theory point of view and from the point of view of actual reality of how people's behaviour is going to change. I think that's worth thinking about.
It's a great question to open up. Of course, we'll let you address it first, and then I think it's a good moment to open up to everybody here.
Yeah, I think that, I guess my semi-rhetorical, but I know it's unanswerable response would be, do we actually physically need the glasses to be living in different worlds? Because today most of us aren't doing that, and we are getting more and more fragmented. So in a way, the granularity and the bubbleization of our social lives is already doing that without the glasses. And then second of all, but in all seriousness, I do think it is very interesting that every time one of these big companies, because they've been trying to do it for decades, to try to introduce a mass-produced, relatively affordable-ish appendage you put on your face. All of these people, everyone wants to beat you up because it's so invasive, right? I don't want to stand next to a dude who's maybe taking photos of me by blinking his eye behind the glasses. There's something kind of socially abject about when it's not everyone having these kind of devices that I'm literally wondering about fashion here, in all seriousness, is will it ever cross a threshold where it's cool to wear these things on a mass scale the way that it is to have Air Jordans? And on this point, I'm a bit so far we don't have a good precedent, because every time it starts Google Glass, whatever, they've all been dismal social failures, not technical failures, but they're just people are not happy when a person comes into a bar with those glasses,
Well, the Ray-Ban version now is a bit more cool.
I think it's another failure. I think
It's
Ray-Ban
another
already
failure.
changed the
I
entire
thought the
campaign.
Ray-Ban is...
They changed the campaign entirely because of
yeah?
the
Oh, yeah. I'm not really following, so okay.
Yeah, I think it hurt Lenny Kravitz forever in his image, because it was like a Lenny Kravitz appearance.
He did?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm
Sorry,
devastated.
I'm not even actually...
Never again you'll be able to.
We have to go to Mel's question.
Yes, about space syntax, yes. Well, first of all, it's already, I think in Oxford Street and in London, we are already bombarded by mixed, let's say, mixed reality messages, because it's all over, we've got all these panels of LCD that projecting whatever brand and whatever message we want to see. So as you walk down Oxford Street now, even at the fronts of the shops, I've been there maybe a year ago or something. I don't go that often anymore in Oxford Street. I think it creates a bit of a...
Claustrophobic.
It feels weird, to be honest. It's space syntax. Can space syntax work in this environment? Yeah, I think yes, there are versions. If we go, then that's why I wanted to talk to her regarding topological, Euclidean, and non-Euclidean, let's say, metrics or ways of describing this relation between where you are physically, where your mind is through a glass, or through even now the with the use of Facebook, etc. Right? We are sort of dislocated. That's why the last project I had with kind of visual dislocation. You live in a city where you read about how other people feel about you, how your image is looking to others, whether I look cool or something like that, or if my house is in a nicer area because the tags of other people living in the next area. So we already live in I will use an AI kind of vocabulary now, a reinforcement learning type of exercise where probably all these social media websites are feeding us the information to trigger responses. So we are already living in a world where we live somewhere and there's some sort of dislocated information fed to us in order to see whether we moved from the other location and the GPS said, oh yes, but the guy went to Prada and bought something because the last 5 posts that you saw from, I don't know, a posh area in London made you change your way of living in Croydon and moving to a posher area. So, I mean, we are already part of this system of training and being part of force-fed some things to gauge our reaction to them. So maybe we need a new model, but a model that describes space. I think that's why we need to talk to each other, that describes space in both a linear and non-linear way, maybe, which I don't have the answer. I don't have the model to.
Yes, so let's move the mic over here.
Thank you for the presentation, very interesting. I wanted also to bring a scientific approach, but also a question that worries me in terms of like how this model is rendering, and if we put together like how the projection space is based on representation. So you have these assumptions and that are based in the monohumanist model, and then they become they render in the space as cities, pathways, etc. Then how the embedding model is rendering into our realities. And it seems to me that one way of going about it is like the work that you do at space syntax, that is somehow, as I understand it, amidst the two of them, like still has a lot of let's say representation into it, or like interpretation of the data. And somewhat I feel like the way these models are rendering into societies right now are much more settled, or they actually are related to contexts of security, control, borders, and somehow space becomes something that affects us as bodies or as humans in a complete different condition that has very rarely to do with wellness, and is increasingly having much more to do with control over our freedom or our status as citizens. And yeah, and so it's not that those models are not being applied one-to-one as like keeping the uniqueness that Bea was talking about, but more like how we could use that for other, like envision other ways for having a positive sort of materialization of cases. And if you guys, I mean, this is more speculative, I do not have the answers, but I see that we are perhaps asking still questions that have to do with the Euclidean model, yet applying tools of the new system, and not yet, so we are like somehow locked into this space that, yeah.
Because I mean, I think that, absolutely, I mean, because I mean, even if you want to put it in less like mathematical terms, it's just like, what is, you know, and again, I'm not saying this to diminish the history, these things come in it from a certain reason, right? When you leave feudalism and you have this invention of liberalism, right, which is also basically in Sylvia Wynter, she's got 2 instances of man, so this is basically the second instance, is more the birth of political liberalism. Well, like, what is the birth of political liberalism? It's that, you know, you have an individual, the rights are put on the individual, right? That it's not controlled by a monarchy, right? There's all these emancipatory things that come with the birth of, like, philosophical liberalism. And our, you know, largely societies are governed at that way, right? Like, we have all the data protections are about the individual, that's why we have to click all the cookies away and so on. But that's also a very particular idea of society, and I think Ben Bratton talks about this too, where it's like basically your image of society is an aggregate of points of individuals. And that's the model of what we think a society is. It's just the agglomeration of a bunch of points, and maybe society's actually different than just an accumulation of points. And it would be very different if these data points were not weaponized against us as individuals. And I mean, just even the idea of collecting so much data, if it was anonymized and used for many other purposes, like maybe people wouldn't be so scared, and we wouldn't, you know, there is so much potential, but it is just being weaponized in this hyper-individualized, targeted way. But then the response seems to be to just like, again, respond on an individual granular level, rather than saying like, maybe our image of what a society is isn't just a bunch of individuals. It's something other, and then make moves based on that frame of reference. But you're absolutely right. It's like we're still trapped within this certain way of thinking about basic things that aren't even technological. What is a society? That are trapped in really old models that are not helping us to use the technologies that we have at our disposal in ways that could be beneficial.
So we listen to Tasos, and then one last question, and we're being asked to leave, unfortunately. But last question from Arya Bartlett.
Just to say something, and I hope I'm partially right, but maybe the empowerment, maybe there's a positive aspect to all this lowering of the barrier of intelligence, at least the open source intelligence, or the open access, let's say, models and all of that, lowering the barrier of knowledge and intelligence. Maybe it might empower people, like everyone in here, using open data, not the ones that are kind of created in a silo and they're used against you. Maybe there's a way for us to fight back and create some ideas that we might be able to spread easier now. And maybe we can fight some of the kind of the silo and the force-fed of information and fake information and all kind of situation. Maybe that's the good side of the intelligence boom that happens.
That's what people thought when the printing press was invented.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It would spread. It would spread.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah. Well,
okay, Ari?
A little bit of pressure now being the last question. I'm not sure.
we might be able to squeeze it, even last one.
Now, I really just have sort of 2 general thoughts or questions, but I'm just very curious to hear what the panel might have to say about it, because the talk was about information flow, AI, data. The first thought or question is, I guess recently there came some reports that the big AI systems like Google and OpenAI, by early 2026, they will have gone through all of the available data, like all of it. And that they're already starting to work with synthetic data. And so that's one, and I'm not sure if these 2 points are related. I feel like they may not be. So I'm just curious, synthetic data, because in terms of like noise, or I mean, what this might mean, that AI is now going to be trained on quote-unquote synthetic data. And the second general question is, in terms of information flow, and also Patricia, I was thinking about your talk, I wonder a little bit how much, also the planetary model, but how much might this be affected by like a movement from sort of digital to something quantum? Because I'm thinking about, you brought up like the butterfly effect, and we're very, this idea, but it's a cause and effect. It's like if I use something here, I move my hand and somehow this will start air currents and this will, and cause and effect itself being something kind of binary, cause and effect.
Or
Quantum
mechanical.
is something else. Quantum is like if I have a quantum pair and one, halfway around the world, it's not cause and effect. It's physically changed something halfway around the world. So again, I'm not sure, maybe they're related, maybe they're not, but I just wonder what these two, synthetic data, quantum, what this means, I guess in a way for all of you on the panel. I don't know if we have enough time, but it seems, just what you might have to say about that in terms of, your models or what you're thinking about. Thank you.
We'll let each of you.
Quick, I think that the quantum entanglement kind of question, I think works well with what Mel said about this kind of these realities that happen away from you. You see them in your eye. I think nowadays we live in a world where something happens in the US and there's automatic reaction. So I think there is quantum entanglement or whatever. Regarding the training thing, I think the models have already eaten up all the known data sets, I think, for maybe a couple of years. I'm not an expert again, I don't work for OpenAI, but I think it's not what you learn from, so it's not about what you learn from, it's how you learn it. So now they create synthetic data to force-fed the information in a different way. So there's this kind of, they call it, there's the reward systems, it's all the tool methods that DeepSeek has invented, right? Which is the way that the reward system works, equally to probably how we grow up, and they gave you, you learn something by touching something hot, etc. I don't know. I'm not really an expert, so I don't know how to answer, to really answer this question about the data usage. I don't know whether you have something on the rest of maybe the quantum entanglement.
Yeah, I think it was my old my old prime minister was infamous for doing that clip, Justin Trudeau, who did explain how I can't do that, so I won't touch it. But I think that there's an interesting thing about it is just obviously, I mean, it's a big jump from when you move away from a mechanically explainable thing, right? Because you can't reverse engineer any of this. So a lot of these things are just I'd say, more instances in the physical universe that are deeply counterintuitive that ought to have the effect of provincializing our own modes of experiencing reality. That would be my hope, right? That these are, so it's a little bit more of a cosmological answer to your question. The other point would be, I think that there's definitely philosophers that are looking at this, obviously Karen Barad is coming from physics, applying this to, I don't know, queering the universe, etc. I'm not saying I agree with all of these things, but I'm just saying people are trying to think through it. Denise Ferreira da Silva also has a very beautiful idea based on this work, which is called difference without separability, that I think is a very different way of, I mean, I'm still trying to imagine, and it's an old text, because I don't understand how you identify particulars in a world without separability, and it's such a mind melt to do that. But then one thing I would just maybe comment on to caution is that, and I think Lorraine Daston does a really good job on this in her book, Against Nature, is the temptation, it seems, a general temptation in human cultures to look for discoveries we found in the physical universe that are like steadfast laws, or at least for a moment of scientific history that's kind of the law, right? And then to seek stability in that by importing it upon our normative domain, which is totally artificial. We can organize our societies in so many different ways. It's not, we don't have to take cues of because the planets orbit like this, we must do this here on Earth. It's no, we can do a lot. So it's just to worry about over-determining, the fascinating things we learn about so-called laws of physics, etc., to be mindful about thinking that we have to use that as the model for how we interact with each other, you know? Because in social structures, I feel we should radically tap into that totally artificial. We can invent stories, we can do a bunch of things, we can create new taxonomies, create new imaginations of ordering the world, seeing things in it, like let's take advantage of that rather than seeking this, I guess, maybe it's a comfort in the stability, but to me it feels very unfreeing to imagine that we're governed by the same laws as cosmos or something.
Maybe we should let Mel.
Mel, would you like to add something in response to this question?
No, it's fine, thanks.
Well, some people here want to leave very badly, so you were really kind to them, particularly. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Thank you, Mel, for connecting, and thanks everybody for being here. And